I'll just say thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again to Todd and Cross IT for FMburgh and organizing meetings and keeping this going. Tonight we are going to talk about the virtual list technique. Like I said earlier, if anything happens with my audio, if the audio slows down, starts up, gets muddy, and you guys need me to back up, try to shout or wave your arms around or something, and I will try to remember what I said and go back. So what I have here is a couple of slides talking about virtual list, and then there's a kind of a simple solution in this file that we'll talk about and kind of, work in a little bit, some scripts we'll go over that will conceptualize the virtual list. And then at the end, this file is, nice and clean, so everybody can have it. So you can take a look at it and, review the scripts, get in there, anything that you would need. So this is, like I said, an introduction to the virtual list technique. I am Teresa Mokwa, and I work with profile developers. I've been working with FileMaker since version 8.5, which is around 2007, and I am certified in versions 11 through 17. So what is a virtual list? So the virtual list technique is an advanced reporting method. It was invented by Bruce Robertson in 2010. You can find it referenced in the FileMaker training series documentation, and there are a variety of tutorials and articles available discussing it on the web. FileMaker has such grading reporting capabilities, as we all know, that many people can't think of a reason why you would ever need to use a virtual list. It's one of those things that kind of comes up. You hear it mentioned, and you hear about how great it is and how flexible it is and how much, how it helps to improve a solution. But then you might have trouble thinking where you could use it. So you need it out if you've ever struggled with displaying a report using the standard means. And so, like I said, in our examples here, we'll see kind of a standard invoice and then a virtual list version of it, and then talk through some extended use of it. So more with what is a virtual list. Using the virtual list allows you to create reports based on mixed data. So data that is from various sources, different contexts, different tables, or from data arrays that you've built via execute SQL calls. And so those can vary greatly. So you can basically, any information that you need to can be dropped into a virtual list. So you're basically kind of drawing it as you go. And this flexibility allows you to display and, more importantly, export the data. So it's one thing to do a bunch of SQL calls and get a bunch of values in an array, but it's another thing to export it in kind of this mixed use environment. So how does it work? To use the virtual list technique, you have to create a special table. It's not that special, but it's different than most of your standard tables. The fields are essentially dynamic placeholders. They're empty cells that we can fill with whatever we want via scripting. And I'll show you those fields in just a second. But you want to imagine the structure of a spreadsheet. And I think this is kind of funny because, we spend all this time talking about how FileMaker is so much better than spreadsheets, but then you have some situations where you actually need FileMaker to act more like a spreadsheet, because usually it's because a client says, oh yeah, and I need to create this file, this very specific CSV that needs to be imported into our other system or something along those lines. And so you need FileMaker to not be like FileMaker anymore. And we needed to create some spreadsheet-like functionality. So if we imagine the structure of a spreadsheet, the table is the sheet, each record is a row, and each field is a column. So in this screenshot of the manage database for this file, so we see in the field section our table. We call it VL. You can call it anything you want online. You might see virtual list, written out, but it doesn't matter. And then in the fields, the most important thing is that you need to have a field that is a number that is just a serial incremented 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's essentially the record number, so that we use that to get our values. So as it says here, each record in your virtual list is like a row in a spreadsheet. And this ID field we're using as our number. It's in auto enter serial and required value unique. So it will count up. So create a column record for each position you need to fill in a report. And so that's what this second field is, this call one. So we call ours call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. There are some other techniques for naming these. There are arguments for having a column that is dedicated for certain types of information. And we'll get more into that if I get ahead of myself and say some stuff that doesn't make any sense yet. They will be illustrated. So then this concept here, creating extra columns for non-display / export to hold things like related ID numbers, conditional formatting tags, etc. You can have as many columns as you need for whatever the case may be. So we've got some solutions where we might have 10 column fields, we might have 40. It all depends on what the end result of your exported data, how many columns they may need to have. And in some cases, because they're fields, you need to create them in advance here. So you want to plan ahead, create more columns in case your data set runs wider, or your data values are going to run wider than you initially planned. So this next one shows after we've added those, the rest of these fields in. So this system has columns 1 through 10. And you can see here that for each of the columns, over here on the right there, these are all calculations. And it's a very simple calculation, unstored, and it's get value, $, column, and then we have the similar numbers, right? Columns 1 through 10. And we're using that ID field to get the record position. Okay. And again, if this is a little confusing here, it makes more sense once you see the data. So hopefully it'll all click in a bit. So, so call 1 is looking at $, column 1. Call 2 is looking at $, column 2. So we are building these global variables, and all of the data, this data array, is going to live in these global variables. Okay. For the ID field that we're using, these are the options. So it's an auto enter. Like I said, it's a serial number. You want to make sure when you start this that, it's starting at 1 and incrementing by 1. And as it says over here, you do not want any gaps or duplicates. So if you're playing around with the virtual list technique and you create a bunch of records and then you say, oh, whoops, I messed something up, or you accidentally delete a set of the records, you want to make sure that you come back here and reset your serial numbers so that there's not going to be any gaps. Gaps in the serial ID will cause gaps in your displayed data, because if you've got, records 1 through 10, but your IDs go, 1 through 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 are gone, those 3 values in your array are not going to show, because it can't get it, because they essentially don't exist. Okay. So in this example system, in this database, it's a simple invoicing system, and it's not like a full out system. I built this file this weekend, so it's just got the fields that it needs for these examples. So it's a simple system. It has a table for customers, invoices, invoice lines, and payments. Our fictional client has 2 needs where the virtual list can be employed. The first one is on a printed customer invoice, all of the invoice lines and all of the payments must be displayed. The second need is that they need to export the invoice to a CSV file in a very specific format. So here is what our managed database looks like, the relationships. So we've got our single table VL. I'm not using any kind of specific relationships here. So just simple customer to invoice, invoice to related lines and payments. And then for one of the reports, I am using a relationship from the invoice ID to the columns in the virtual list, right? And that's because of there's related data on the virtual list report that's pointing back to reference just on the layout. And again, I will talk about that when we get there. Okay, and then this screen is an example of what the client says that they want. So they want to have their column 1 have the customer name to be replaced with that, number of invoices, total invoices, and then on this second column, number, date, item descriptions, all this. So, as many lines for the items on the invoice, as many lines down here for the payments, total, etc. Right? So when you look at that and you say, okay, so you want your invoices to get spat out in this way, that's the requirement. And so that's what we're going to do. So this layout is just showing what the virtual list looks like when there's nothing in it, right? So we've got our ID field with just its numbers. Right now, this has 25 records in it, and the columns are currently empty. One note about the number of the virtual list records. So how many virtual list records you need depends on your reporting needs, right? If your report needs 50 rows, is going to have 50 values top to bottom, then you need 50 records. If you need 5,000, you need 5,000 records. So just plan accordingly. And what you can do is you can have built into your scripting, it can know in advance. So before you run a script, let's say you have your system and typically the reporting that you're running has about 1,000 lines, or you think, oh, it'll never go over 1,000 lines. But then they have 2,000 customers instead of 50 because their business is growing. So in the script that builds the report, can have it count how many lines it's going to need, and if it's short, it can jump into a subscript to loop through and create more virtual list records so that the report doesn't cut short. Because if you have, if your report only has 50 rows in it, and then your data has 70 lines, those last 20 lines just don't show up. And, unless you're paying attention, you may not be the wiser. So someone will point it out, but better to have that in mind and plan ahead. And these are very lightweight. There's nothing in them. For the most part, they're looking at global variables. So they're not going to take up a lot of space in your system if you go ahead and generate 5,000 or 10,000 records to sit there. So one of the things that we do in every system that has that we use the virtual list is we create a script to loop through and create more virtual list records. For this one, I'm not going to run this, but this is an example of what I would do. You know, how many do you want to create, and do 10 or 25? Usually I'm adding another 100 or 1,000, you know, depending on what I'm doing. But that's the idea. You want to kind of build in a way to create more. And then if you notice, like, make sure that if you do anything with this set, like I said, accidentally delete some and then create some more, that you don't have any gaps, because that'll cause gaps in your reporting. So at this point, this is our kind of silly little invoicing system. So we've got some invoices here for Mr. Wendell Whiskers, and he is ordering a lot of cat food, catnip treats, and laser pointers. And he has a couple payments that he's made already, but he still owes some money. So on this particular invoice, these buttons over here on the right, these will run 3 separate reports, right? The first one is going to be a standard FileMaker invoice. This second one will create a virtual list version of that report. And then the third one will take us to our Excel version, or, you know, our CSV exportable version. So for this first one, it takes us to this simple layout. And now, as you probably all know, but it never hurts to bring up. So when you are creating an invoice, or not even just an invoice layout, but any layout that has an unknown quantity of items, you never create your printable screen or layout using portals, right? So in the file itself, on the screen, we've got portals to our line items and our portals to our payment. When we create the invoice to look at it, this is based on the invoice lines. Right? If I go into layout mode, I can see that, let me turn on, and this is probably this part of the screen, looking at the status bar, is really, really tiny for you guys. So that's why I was trying to make everything huge so that it would share easily on the screen. But this layout is based on the invoice line table. And so our body section is the invoice lines. But to display the payment information, we have to do that in a portal, right? Because that's coming from another table. We can't mix our two tables in a single list layout, right? So our challenge with the client requirement is to show all of the payments. We go back to browse here. So we see that the 2 payments on this particular invoice show up fine because they fit in this portal. But if we add some more payments, so now we're up to 15, and over here we can see that 1,500. Well, he still owes $30. So I'll add one more payment for $30. So he's all paid up, but we can't see all of the payments on this invoice. So this particular invoice will not work for the client's requirements. So in order to generate a report that mixes the invoice line information and the payment information, into this, the same list, I'm going to use a virtual list. So let's close this, and we will click on our little star, and it does a bunch of thinking. And now we have here, it looks kind of similar. One challenge with virtual list reports is that because we are using a list for most of our information, you have a little some more challenges with formatting and how things look. Sometimes you have to put a lot more into formatting your layout, right? So let me pop into layout view for this one. And on this screen, you can see, I don't know if you can see up here, the table reference for the layout. It's invoice_VL. So from our relationship graph, it was, the third table occurrence on the right-hand side. So it was the virtual list that is related to the invoice. So that allows us to have, these references, these merge fields at the top are pointing to invoice data. So the customer name, the invoice number, and invoice date. Everything else on this report is coming from the virtual list. And I've got column 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's go back to browse mode. And we can see that this is very mixed data, right? So we've got label, like column headers or labels for each of our columns, mixed with the item descriptions, amounts, quantities, and line totals. We have some kind of sub-summary information here, the total amount of the invoice lines. There's the payment dates stacked up, all 4 of them, the payment amounts, payment totals, and the balance due at the very bottom, right? So this would fulfill their requirement. One thing that we also see here is we've got some mixed formatting. So the item description, amount, quantity, and line total, those kind of labels, are bold. And down at the bottom, the payment information, both the payment date and amount labels are bold and italics, and the payment information is italicized to make it look a little different. And to do that in layout mode, and again, this might be super tiny for you guys to see, but I will describe it. On these fields, I have conditional formatting that says, hey, if column 2 says bold or italics, to apply those formats. So let's look and see what the virtual list looks like. So this is part of it, right? Because I only have a couple fields showing on the screen here. But this gives you a little bit of an idea, and then we'll look at the script, right? So you can see how the script builds this data. So the first column here, this is the ID of that invoice. The second column is holding any formatting information. So we see none, 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 italics, italics, bold, and then these are all empty because there's no data in them at all, but the records are still there. And then in column 3, this is where the data is starting, right? And then column 4 would have the amounts, column 5 has the quantities, and so on. So that's all kind of building column by column, field by field. So let's go to, hold on one second. Let me pull up my script and zoom in a bit. So I just want to walk through the script and kind of, show, like I said, conceptually how virtual lists are built. I have commented this out. I don't think excessively, but I think enough that it will make things clear. So the first thing that we want to do is we need to clear the virtual list. And the virtual list script, I'll pull that up too. Super, 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 super simple. Whoop. Is simply setting those double dollar values because they're persistent, right? Double dollar values are going to be persistent throughout your session. So you want to make sure that you're clearing them at the beginning of any script that's using it, just so you don't, accidentally, glom onto an existing one. So we've got a clear VL subscript that simply sets all of the values of the double dollar column fixed variables to empty. So that's all that one is. So we run that subscript at the beginning. And like I said, this is pretty well commented. The script is starting on the invoice detail. We are going to set some variables for invoice total, total payments, and balance due, because those are going to be set into the array of values later on, right? After we've left the context of the invoice, we need to set in the invoice total. After the payments, we need to set in the total payments. So we're going to set all those variables up front, and then we'll place them later when necessary. And I will say that this, if this gets unbearable, this is a very long script. I'll jump around a little bit maybe, but it's about 200 lines because it is working specifically building line by line, and it has a ton of comments. So we've set those variables for the invoice. And then this next section here, go to related invoice lines. So we do a go to related record, pop it into a new window, and if not, get last error. So there should be invoice lines. If not, it kind of just leaves at the end. But otherwise, we need to create the first line of data, right? So I always like to do this anytime we're doing virtual lists, comment out exactly what each column is supposed to be, because otherwise future you comes back to look at these scripts and is like, I don't know what the heck is going on. What am I looking at here? You want to comment out your scripts so that it's much easier. If you need to add a column, if you need to bump a column or make any kind of modifications, the commenting will save tons of time. So this set of comments is defining what we've got here. So in column 1, all the way down, I'm going to be setting the invoice ID, and that's the variable that we defined at the top. In column 2, I am putting in formatting information, if any, and I also like to comment, put in what the options are at the time. So if I had added a third option in the conditional formatting of the layout, I would note that here. If I were to add conditional formatting, I would come back to the script and make sure I add in what those options are, so I know when I'm back here visiting that there's more that I could do. Column 3 is the item description, 4 is the amount, 5 is the quantity, 6 is the line total. All right, this next chunk, we're creating the header row. So this is the first value in the entire virtual list. So $, column 1, we have the value of invoice ID. Column 2 is bold. Column 3 is item description. Column 4 is amount. Column 5 is quantity. And those are the labels, right? So they're in quotes. Column 6 is line total. And now we're going to get into our first loop. So we're already on the new invoice lines in this new window, but now we're actually going to use them. Very, 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 very important for your second and every subsequent value in your virtual value list. you need to append to your column. And this is a return delimited list. So from this time in, because there have been countless times that I've quickly tried to, start a virtual list and I'm running through it and I'm like, why isn't there more than one value? Because I'm replacing the one each time instead of appending to it. So very important to remember to append to your virtual list. So in our loop, we're setting each one to itself. So its current value, ampersand, pilcrow, ampersand, and then the following value. So again, in column 1, we are using that invoice ID all the way down. Column 2, for the data, I put in none. I could just leave this blank because it's irrelevant. I'm using bold and italics for labels and the payment data. But for the invoice lines, not using it. I've just decided to put none in instead of leaving it blank. Column 3, we are referencing the invoice line item description. Column 4, we're referencing the amount. Now, one thing about columns 4 and 6, because I've got, because these are numbers, right? These are the amounts. I'm using a custom function called add dollar format to wrap that in a $sign. The dot in change. Now, I'm doing that because I can't tell the field on the layout to use currency formatting in the data options because I can't. It's not a number field. One thing you could do with your virtual list is create some fields that are specific numbers or dates. So in this particular file, call 1 through 10, they're all text. I added 2 fields onto this afterwards because I was kind of going back and forth whether or not to make these number fields, and I just decided against it. So there's a call 1N and a call 2N in there, and their calculated result is number. So I could have used those, but then I'd still have my text labels. I'm mixing too many things here. So the decision to use the currency formatting in line here in the script was just to make this a little easier. Another thing that is a bit of an aside, but if you get really into doing virtual lists, you could have multiple, so column 1 text on top of column 1 number, and use hide object when programmatically to say, oh, well, if column 2 equals number, then show the number field and not the text field. So it can get very complicated at the layout level, if you like getting complicated. But for simplicity, this is how I decided to do this. So the currency formatting is added to this text field at the time here in scripting. So that's for columns 4 and 6. So you guys probably get the idea of how this loop works. So this runs through all of the invoice lines and allows us to just build as many lines as we need. We exit that loop, close that temp window. We'll scoot to the next chunk. So again, I'm outlining the individual rows, right? So set invoice total in column 6. So this single row has the invoice ID, none in the formatting column, then a bunch of blanks, then total, and the invoice total, that variable that we created at the very, very beginning from the invoice context. Next chunk is set spacer row. Everything except the ID and the formatting are blank. Feels a little tedious, but this is the level of detail. If you want a space, you got to build it. Then go to the related payment lines. Acts exactly the same as the invoice section. go to related record in a new window. If there are payment records to work with, go ahead and do this chunk. Again, I outlined what the payment line details section are. So for this one, column 3 and 4, they're both empty. And then column 5 and 6 are the payment date and the amount. So similar to the other one, header row. This one has italics and bold as its formatting for labels, payment date and amount. And then in the virtual list record loop for payments, we've got the invoice ID italics, 2 blanks, and then looping through the available pay date and payment amount information. Okay. When we're done with that loop, we close that window. Again, we're setting a single row with the total payments. We have another spacer we drop in there. Then the balance due is the last single row. And then that's it for building the data. Then we just move over to the VL layout here. Again, pop it in a new window. Now, at the end of this script here, so this little line here is omit empty rows. So remember, as we were talked about earlier, with the virtual list table, it could have 1,000 records in it. So if you have 1,000 records and you only use 25 values in it, you do not want to print that invoice and have it print 50 pages worth of nothing, right? So you need to make sure you're only going to the records that you need to display those. So what I have here is I'm constraining the found set to omit the records that where column 1 is empty, right? Because in this particular virtual list, I have set the invoice ID in every column 1 for the entirety of the report. So that's going to work here to only get those, 20 lines that I need. Now, in the other report that I created, I did not set an ID. And with that one, what we would want to do is create a counter. And so if we only need 50 lines, it's going to be on the last step, you're on the virtual list, go to 50, and then omit multiple for the rest of your found set, essentially, right? So just to get those out of the way, and you're only exporting what you want. Because even though all of the data is blank, and if you're exporting it and you're creating like a CSV, if you export 1,000 empty lines, that's a much bigger file than if you export 20 lines, right? So that's a consideration why you want to make sure that you're only getting a found set. You're only working with your found set rather than dumping out a lot of empty records. So that's it for this script, right? The refresh window at the end is because of that related data to the invoice that's at the top of the layout, and that's just so that shows. That's kind of the long and short of how that script works to build the virtual list data, right? So again, if we go back to, well, actually, we'll jump to this layout. So this is the layout to display the second, the third report. Actually, this is the one that's kind of set up to export, but it's all showing the virtual list. So this gives you a wider view of what the virtual list data looks like. So for the virtual list invoice, here's our column 1 with all of our IDs, column 2 with all of our formatting information, column 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can see the spaces that were in there. That dollar formatting is all in place, right? I'll go back to the invoice. And I will click this third button over here, and that is going to run the third script, which is the export. So this is the same layout we just saw, same records. That script just went and wiped it all clean and rebuilt it. So now we've got our customer name, Mr. Whiskers, number of invoices, the invoice number, invoice date. So because these are, it's not writing across like it would in a spreadsheet application, but it's all the same thing. But now we've got all this spacing, and we can export it as a CSV. So the script for this is just, showing the field order for export. I know this might be small, but the export order that I have here is just sending out columns 2 through 6. If we look at the layout, that's because, we aren't going to send out our ID. Nobody needs that. And column 1 is empty. The reason column 1 is empty is chiefly because I reused the first script to build the second one. And rather than rewrite the entire thing to move the data over to column 1, I just said, no, I'm just going to make all of these empty. Because the data is just about the same. And this information was in the right place. So when you're exporting, these are real fields. You can put these in any order you want. If you build a virtual list and then somebody says, you know what we need? We need to insert a value in here, or can you move these around for the final export? All you have to do is shift these fields, put them in whatever order you want. If you need to add a value in the script, just rather than, like I said before, rather than creating a volume or a column 3, another one, and bumping everything out, I would add my new value to column 7, just put whatever needs placed in there, and then I'll put it in the second position for exporting. No one's going to be the one, nobody cares who's not developing. And you just want to comment it out so that future you comes back and doesn't say, what the heck, why is column 8 here? Oh, okay, that's right. They wanted me to insert this. They came up with this later and wanted it in the report. So if I export this, so the export VL, I canned the path for the export. And I'm just going to pop up a quick view here. So you can see in this quick view of the CSV, full customer name, invoices, all the information is in here, and that's just what they needed for their export. All right. If I come back and come to this invoice, maybe we'll go to the next invoice, and we can add some more stuff to it. Yeah, I didn't build this out for a product list or anything like that. Putting a lot of cat food for this guy. And we can add some payments. He's overpaid. That's fine. And we will run this again and bang. So it's very fast, extremely customizable. Anything that you can think of, somebody gives you a complicated task to generate data for your system that, you can't quite figure out how to do it. The list view is not going to work. You could do something with a ton of calculations, or on your layout, you can script a whole bunch of global variables and pop them everywhere to show data from different places. Virtual list is a good way to get around some of this stuff. And like I said, very, very flexible, and it's not that difficult. Once it clicks in your head, and you kind of get that you're just dropping this data in different pieces, and it's all the script. It's all about step by step working through the script and outlining exactly what label, what field is going to go where. Are there any questions? Is there anything you guys want to see again from the file?
You said this presentation is recorded and will be available to us, right?
Yes, and you can have the file.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice.
Thank you.
So you can have, that way you can get in there and you can mess around with it, and have fun.
It's quite exquisite. It works out beautifully. And, there's a lot of times people do want, my medics want a lot of stuff in Excel, and that's what they deal. So something like this would be very, very helpful, because we do keep track of all of our invoicing to customers that are personal pays, and this would be very, very helpful. So that's exquisite. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Virtual lists are my nemesis, so that I appreciate you having the file available too.
Yeah, I thought it would be, because it's so hard to just talk about, that being able to give you a file would just be the best way to get it through.
Yeah, I need a visual, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Problem.
Thank you.
Yep, very good.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, we can keep going if people want to keep going, or we can just kind of move on and circle and see if anybody has one more thing. And then if people come up with questions, then we can circle back if that works. So we got one more thing. So I don't know if anybody has, like I said, if you do come up with a question for virtual lists, we can circle back to that.
Sure.
But do you have anything that's not a virtual list thing?
Teresa, what version do you use for, are you using FileMaker 18? Are you on 19 now, or that you made this?
Yeah, this is in 18.
It's in 18.
Yeah, but everything, I mean, it would work probably in 14. There's nothing special going on at all.
Okay.
So.
Believe it or not, we're upgrading.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. We're moving to KeyBiz 8. We've been working on it for the last 6 months, because we're doing a lot of customizations. And it'll run in FileMaker. It runs in FileMaker 18. And the computer I was setting up last night, actually, I got 15 to still work on Catalina, because I wasn't sure, because our KeyBiz 6 server is still FileMaker 14.
Oh, wow.
So we're on the software maintenance. So whenever 19 comes out, we're going to move to that. And I'm trying to get up to date. Everything I built in EC Pro was like on, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I haven't really, now I'm doing 18, so. And is there much difference on 19? I haven't tried it yet.
Not that I've seen yet.
No.
Yeah. I haven't even opened the release yet.
Yeah, I didn't download it, I guess it's available in the developers thing yet, right? Yeah. I haven't even tried it. I mean, I watched a webinar about it, but it looks like it wasn't too much, other than it would be great whenever you need to move stuff to to the cloud or something like that. It seems like it'll be a lot more friendly. I'm going to try the virtual list because now I need to really do it. 5 years later, I'm saying, yeah, now I'm going to really do it.
Really,
Yeah,
thank
if
you,
you have
Teresa. That was beautiful.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Let us know.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
No, Laura, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just wondering if people wanted a different way to network. Because I created a Slack group. If anybody was interested. So if you had
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I can share the
Yes.
link.
Yes, I'd be interested. Thank you.
Me too.
And I'll make sure to include that in our follow-up email.
Okay.
So I'll probably get that out either tomorrow or Friday. Anybody else before I jump back in?
Know anything else? Okay.
I have, of course, my last one, but I'll say that till the last minute.
Okay. This is actually one more thing. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, but was working on an update on a server and noticed that the automatic notifications were turned off for server errors and like the warning messages. So I went through, made sure the email account and stuff was in there, ran the check. I got the email, but as soon as I went back, it had disabled itself. And this is the only time I've ever seen that happen. I didn't know if anybody else, I think it's a FileMaker server 18. Has anybody ever run across that on any of the servers that you've been working on?
Not
No.
yet, anyway.
Yeah,
No.
not yet.
Okay. I mean, it's not,
No.
luckily the server is pretty robust that I don't need to get those messages necessarily. And I don't want to have to uninstall FileMaker server and reinstall it to see if that fixes it, but didn't know if anybody'd seen that or not. So, okay. So that's my one more thing. I guess do have one announcement. And that is, last month, we had our, Claris Connect, kind of demo that, Bobby and Laura had walked us through. But Claris has actually updated their pricing structure for Claris Connect. I think it was maybe just announced here earlier this week, is that they still have the essentials and the standard plans, which are the $9.99 a month or $99 a month, and then the $249 a month, with the big difference between being limited to 15 active flows versus unlimited flows, and the number of API calls being different. But what they have done is they've added this FileMaker Plus, which is for users where you're either also purchasing FileMaker licensing, or you already are an existing FileMaker customer that's valid and up to date and all that. You can get Claris Connect for only $49.99 a month. It's the number of, or the 10,000 API calls of the Essentials plan, but you have unlimited flows, so you can use it as much as you want, from that regard. And then they also have a developer plan that's for testing purposes only, that's unlimited flows, but it only includes like 500 API calls per month. So I think those are probably two things that were lacking. So it's nice that they're listening to folks and have made those additions. So hopefully that makes, Claris Connect a little bit more attractive, especially for us that are already using FileMaker anyway. So,
Well, it's good to see they're continuing to recycle the names.
yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's true, I guess. Yeah. The next one will be FileMaker Plus 2, right? Or something. I don't know. So that's the public service announcement. I haven't forgotten, Paul. We'll come back to you. The next meeting, we'll go ahead and stay on June 3rd, first Wednesday of the month. I guess there's a chance we might be able to meet in person, but it seems like, the remote meetings have worked the last couple months. So just stay tuned as far as that goes. I guess the other big announcement since our last get-together was that the Claris Engage conference is still happening on that week in August. However, it is moving to an all-virtual event, and I think, Claris is still trying to figure out some of what's going on. So there are really not a whole lot of details other than, a lot of like the keynote presentations will be, online and available, but what that's going to look like. Something to consider, if we are able to gather together, do we want to have a watch party as an FMburgh group on one of those days just to hang out and hear what FileMaker has to say? So think about that, and we'll probably take a poll. And if you've not seen Onward by Pixar, I recommend it. It comes out on Blu-ray on May 19th. So
I have not seen it.
Our next topic will probably be about FileMaker 19, but I'm not sure yet. I mean, they were in the preview webinar, they hinted that it would be, end of May, early June, and probably as long as it is officially released by then, that's what we'll be talking about in some fashion. And
It's not going to be 18 plus.
It will not be 18 plus. No.
Or 18.5.
Yeah. They should do. Yeah, that makes more sense.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
I think seriously, they should just jump ahead and match it to the year. Since they're doing yearly releases, it's really silly to be like 1 or 2 years off in your number.
Yeah.
So. And this is the last time.
I guess the last thing I have to say is thank you, Teresa, for an excellent presentation.
Yes. Hear, hear.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Yay! Yay!
And so I guess, does anybody else have one more thing? Since we gave you a minute, or other follow-up questions for Teresa on the virtual list.
I'm just waiting anxiously for Paul's last joke of the night.
Me too. Me too.
All right, Paul, I guess the floor is yours.
All right. In regards to the toilet paper hoarding, okay, there's an explanation for it. Some people are eating their own cooking for the first time in years.
Yep.
Hey, thanks everybody. This is.
Thanks.
I look forward to this every month. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for hosting.
Hey, you're welcome, everybody. Have a great night and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll
You too.
see you all
Thank
next
you.
month.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.